Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a really fascinating field, one that looks at one of humanity's most powerful and maybe most personal forces, religion.
So, how in the world do you study something as personal as religion academically, right? I mean, that's the central puzzle here. And the answer, it really starts with this one crucial distinction.
Okay, so to get a handle on this, the first thing scholars have to do is draw a really clear line in the sand. On one side, you have theology. Think of theology as the insider's view. It's studying a faith from within that tradition. On the other side, you've got religious studies, which is more like an outsider's perspective.
In this table, it lays out that difference perfectly. You can see the theologian is asking questions from a place of faith, right? Like, what is God really like? But the religious studies scholar, they're asking a totally different kind of question. They're asking, okay, how has the belief in God shaped human cultures? How has it influenced politics and societies? It's not about what should be true, but about describing what is happening with people.
So, how did they maintain that outsider view? Well, they use this really important tool, and it's got a kind of intimidating name, methodological atheism. Now, that does not mean the scholar is an atheist, not at all. It just means that for the sake of their research, they temporarily press pause on their own personal beliefs, whether they're a believer or a skeptic. The whole point isn't to prove or disprove God, but just to look at religion as a human thing and figure out how it works. All right, so once they've got that neutral stance, what's actually in their toolkit? Let's take a look at some of the different lenses, from the social sciences that scholars use to try and explain what religion actually does for people and for society.
And you can't talk about this without bringing up Karl Marx. From his point of view, religion was all about economics. He famously called it the opium of the people. He saw it as this powerful painkiller for the oppressed. It gives comfort, sure, but in his view, it also might just keep people from seeing the real economic reasons for their suffering and doing something about it.
Then you've got the psychologists, and they were kind of split on this. You have William James, who said, hey, look at the results. He thought we should judge religion by its fruits. The positive, sometimes totally life-changing effects it has on people. But then you've got Sigmund Freud. He had a much different take. He saw religion as this grand illusion, basically wishful thinking, like we invent this cosmic father figure to make ourselves feel less helpless in a big, scary universe.
But not everyone was convinced. A lot of scholars started to feel like, wait a minute, if we only talk about psychology or economics, are we missing the main event? They argued that the actual experience of the sacred, the core of it all, was getting completely lost in the shuffle.
And that brings us to this idea of sui generis. It's a Latin phrase that just means of its own kind. The argument was that a religious experience isn't just a symptom of something else, like a psychological need or an economic problem. No, it's its own unique category of human experience, and you have to study it on its own terms.
One of the most important thinkers here was Rudolf Otto. He came up with this term, the numinous, to describe that core, non-rational feeling. And he said it has three parts. First, there's mysterium, this sense of something wholly other, totally outside our everyday world. Then comes tremendum, that feeling of awe, even a little bit of dread in the face of this immense power. And finally, fascinance, this incredible magnetic pull that draws you toward it.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Like any good academic field, religious studies eventually had to do some serious soul-searching. It started to turn that critical eye back on itself and ask some really tough questions about its own foundations.
And this next idea was an absolute bombshell. Scholars like Jonathan Z. Smith came along and basically said, hey, that thing we've all been studying called religion? It doesn't actually exist out there in the world as some neat, tidy category. Whoa. He argued that religion is an idea we, the scholars, created in our offices. It's an academic tool we invented to compare different cultures, and this is the key part, it was often based on a very specific Western, Protestant Christian model. This was a game changer. It meant that the supposedly neutral thing they were studying was in fact a reflection of their own biases.
And right on the heels of that, feminist scholars took it a step further. They pointed out that this academic tool, this category of religion, wasn't just Western-centric. It was also overwhelmingly male-centric. They developed what's called a hermeneutics of suspicion, which is just a brilliant way of saying they read old texts while actively looking for the biases. And by doing that, they started this incredibly important work of digging up and telling the religious stories and experiences of women, which had been ignored for centuries.
Then you have post-colonial thinkers who push the critique even further. People like Talal Asad started asking,
Is our whole modern idea of what counts as religion, this private belief system, separate from politics and law, is that really neutral? Or is it actually a very specific concept that was created by modern Western states as a way to manage and control people?
So, wow, after all that self-critique, you might be wondering, where does that leave the field? Well, it's led to some incredibly cool and cutting-edge new directions. Let's take a look at where the study of religion is headed next.
One of the biggest new areas is the cognitive science of religion. This field literally looks at how our brains are wired. It suggests that maybe we're just cognitively predisposed to believe. For example, we seem to have something called a hyperactive agency detection device, or HADD. That's our built-in tendency to see intention everywhere, to assume that rustle in the bushes is a person or an animal, not just the wind. It's a survival instinct. And our brains also love stories that are just a little bit weird, what they call minimally counterintuitive ideas. Think of a talking snake or a flying horse. They're just strange enough to be super memorable and easy to spread. The whole idea is that maybe our brains are just naturally built to find supernatural ideas compelling.
At the same time, you've got something called the material turn. And this approach basically says, let's stop focusing so much on what's going on inside people's heads and look at what they're actually doing with their bodies and their stuff. The argument here is that religion isn't just a set of beliefs. It is the physical experience. It's the weight of a prayer book, the smell of incense, the sound of chanting, the taste of communion wine. It's in the objects, the spaces, the senses. That's where religion actually comes alive.
So you can see how the field has evolved, right? From developing this outsider's toolkit to turning around and critiquing its own tools, and now to looking at our brains and our bodies. The academic study of religion is this incredible, ongoing quest to understand a really fundamental part of what it means to be human. And it leaves us with this really exciting question. If our tools for understanding ourselves are always changing, what on earth will we discover next?